play? The whole world is in chess. Any move can be the death of you. Do anything except remain where you started, and you cannot be sure of your end. None of us know our end, really, or what hand will guide us there. A king may move a man. A father may claim a son. That man can also move himself. And only then does that man truly begin his own game. Remember that howsoever you are played, or by whom, your soul is in your keeping alone. Even though those who presume to play you be kings or men of power, when you stand before God, you cannot say, "But I was told by others to do thus," or that virtue was not convenient at the time. This will not suffice. Remember that.
Obviously, as attention wanes, it's more than likely we'll see more and more narrative offshoots introduced as stopgaps to fill in for any apparent lull in the action, with more protests, shootings, terrorist incidents, resurging infection, returning lockdowns, second waves, and probably brand new viruses, as they're already pushing the narrative towards mutated swine flu, with an even more ludicrous bubonic plague, of all things, lurking on the fringes, to keep everyone terrified and distracted, while they bring in even more dictatorial measures as they purposely detain the populace while apparently searching for whatever it is they appear to be looking for. Unfortunately for them, they did such a good job turning the populace into brain-dead morons that despite all the drama, hype, and psychological manipulation, they failed to achieve sufficient terror to stir the complacent from their perpetual slumber, which means that the next phase will undoubtedly try to correct that mistake. So we can expect to see some real imaginative fantasies emerging in the not-too-distant future, as they try to find some form of common ground that the greater majority will sit up, take notice, and ultimately fall for, possibly even going so far as to introduce extraterrestrial threats, such as asteroids or even aliens, as this is, after all, now the Twilight Zone. Which brings us nicely to the Great Reset, which for all intent and purpose sounds like the title of a movie all on its own. And at first glance one could certainly be forgiven for believing that any such grand title would be found among the realms of Final Solution, New World Order, and One World Government, originating from some form of lunatic conspiracy mouthpiece or site. But then we would certainly be wrong, as it actually comes from the likes of the Project for the New American Century, the Rockefeller Foundation's Scenario for the Future of Technology and International Development, Agenda 21, and SAGE's options for increasing adherence to social distancing measures via the World Economic Forum, of all places, where we find the exact same world leaders, scientists, entrepreneurs, members of royal bloodlines, and large corporations all working together through very special and selective invite-only membership. But we'll skim past the more obvious surface aspect and delve into the core message, which is far more interesting. And remember, so far we've already had a deadly pandemic, a dictatorial world takeover and lockdown, talk of forced vaccines, personal tracking, a social justice war machine on steroids, swine flu, and bubonic plague, as relayed by our own media and governments, and not originating from some fantasy tinfoil hat, but more importantly, actual evidence we've all witnessed with our very own eyes. Although, please also remember that appearances can be deceptive. So what exactly is the Great Reset? What on earth could all these illustrious world figures be talking about?
It is obvious that we are in the midst of the most severe crisis the world has experienced since World War II.
The midst of a crisis based on a complete hoax surrounding ordinary seasonal flu and hyped into a psychological frenzy unprecedented since the last World War, solely manufactured and perpetrated by the media and various world authorities. So we're already off to a good start.
75 years ago, countries and people came together to shape the post-war global order, which brought us decades of peace, increased global cooperation, and prosperity to hundreds of millions of people around the world.
And if we didn't know any better, these words sound almost like a call to arms, as if they could have originated from a long-gone painter and decorator during the highlight of his political career back in the 1930s. All we'd actually be missing is the accompanying German national anthem playing in the background. Because let us not forget that World War II was carefully crafted, manipulated and manufactured by the same entities that arranged the sinking of the Lusitania, knew of the imminent attack on Pearl Harbor, and arranged the destruction of the Twin Towers, so that the entire world would be galvanized into waging war, with each side believing they were justified and right, while the 1% elite profited from every single aspect of the worldwide conflict, and have continued to do so right up to present day, while everyone else works harder and longer, making less and less as prices, expenditure and taxes increase.
The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that our old systems are not fit anymore for the 21st century.
Old systems that were created for and by them that have suited and served them well, which begs one to question as to what exactly went wrong. What has now changed that they must scrap the existing system? While it is obvious that this is the exact reason why we are currently witnessing the death of democracy, free speech and freedom, with the social justice, climate change and LGBTQ war machine that is effectively rewriting reality so that they can now hold up all these terrible incidents as examples of the decaying old system.
It has laid bare the fundamental lack of social cohesion, fairness, inclusion, and equality.
Where lack of social cohesion, fairness, inclusion, and equality are all constructs of their narrative and their reality, upon which we all enact based on the majority consensus laid down in the Holy Scripture as written by the author. And as time has inevitably progressed, that consensus has shifted, directed and pushed towards their desired direction.
Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system.
Time being their inevitable nemesis and ultimate downfall, as the population slowly rise from the depths of their deceptive slumber, and reality reaches the point of its own great reset, abandoning all the old in favor of the new. Hence the mad dash scramble to include as much of their agenda as possible to narrow the chance of missing this very small window of opportunity, which is ultimately revealing each and every member and every single piece of their agenda.
For the need for the post-corona era. We have a choice to remain passive, which would lead to the amplification of many of the trends we see today.
To remain passive, which begs one to ask why they have all been sitting on their hands, passively and arrogantly watching everything fall apart, while doing absolutely nothing to stop or deal with any of those pressing issues as they arose. And let us not forget that we don't write reality, as we're all merely actors and characters on a world stage, while the authors and scriptwriters write the narrative and scripts for us all to follow, so any action or inaction would be a direct and deliberate result of their narrative, none of which would be added or omitted by any accident or mistake.
Polarization, nationalism, racism, and ultimately increased social unrest and conflicts.
A polarization and division, once again created and implemented by their own forces. So watch out everyone, we're all going to lose our national identity and become genderless, colourless, emotionless drones. And we only need examine the recent fake identity politics to see who the real racists are. So when was the last time we as individuals attacked, invaded, or went to war with anybody? Especially when it is our governments and authority that decide and dictate any such massive national action. But once again, all carefully crafted and created through bias and prejudice, manufactured through division and polarization, solely by them, using their tools and their agenda. Yet, all forming a perfect storm of manufactured recent issues to be held up as examples against their new running narrative.
But we have another choice. We can build a new social contract.
We don't create or build social contracts. They do.
Particularly integrating the next generation.
Which means using indoctrination in schools and colleges to re-educate the next generations.
We can change our behavior to be in harmony with nature again.
When it was the author that created this false reality and technology, with its own authority deliberately causing any separation and division from nature.
And we can make sure that the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution are best utilized to provide us with better lives.
Fourth Industrial Revolution. Did anyone know we had a previous three? Still, we now have another new catchphrase that we'll all probably hear a lot more of in the not too distant future. Yet the new renewable technologies themselves have been proven to be more wasteful, destructive and toxic to the environment than the existing ones.
In short, we need a great reset.
In short, we translates to them, because they need a great reset, and they're certainly going to try to make sure that they get one.
We have to mobilize all constituents of our global society to work together.
Mobilize is a military phrase used to describe the marshalling of forces into action, while global order, as previously mentioned, and global society gives us even more proof that the New World Order has been with us for quite some time already.
We must not miss this unique window of opportunity.
Once again, he stresses time as very important, with the emphasis on missing the window, where the Latin origin of unique is one, and the Old Norse origin of window refers to the eyes of the home. One eye, or all-seeing eye.
For this reason, I'm grateful that we are joined for this announcement of the Great Reset Initiative, not only by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, but by representatives of international organizations, business, trade unions, scientists, and above all, the young generation.
His Royal Highness, international organizations, business, trade unions, scientists, and the young generation, none of which were ever elected by any nation across the world, including His Royal Highness, who is merely a useless clown prince that the majority in the UK don't even want as their king, but who will now determine, influence and mandate all those world governments to follow their lead and their agenda, regardless of whether their populace agrees or disagrees. So much for democracy.
These are unprecedented times. Every person on the planet has been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic.
And how exactly would any such privileged and entitled person, living in their own lavish and luxurious bubble, know how coronavirus affected any of us lesser mortal humans.
Our world came to a standstill, and it became clear that we did not have the answer or the mechanisms to address such an unprecedented global threat.
It came to a standstill because the World Authority locked everything down, based entirely on a hoax perpetrated by the same World Authority and media.
The threats posed by this dreadful pandemic came upon us suddenly with very little warning.
Yet the official narrative tells us that they knew of a Wuhan outbreak well before any global effects, where the World Health Authority initially dismissed any possible global threat, which would mean they already knew about it and deliberately escalated the agenda to make it suddenly appear, but failed miserably.
The threat of climate change has been more gradual, but its devastating reality for many people and their livelihoods around the world, and its ever greater potential to disrupt, surpasses even that of COVID-19.
So just like climate change and LGBTQ jumped on the George Floyd bandwagon, His Royal Highness now slipped it conveniently into the corona issue. Although one must seriously question as to how climate change contributed to an alleged deadly virus outbreak. Maybe it was all that rain, which was, after all, manufactured by deliberate human manipulation.
In addition to COVID-19, over the last few decades, we have seen bird flu, swine flu, Ebola, MERS, SARS, which are all zoonotic diseases originating in animals. More than half of all pathogens affecting humans come from animals.
Yet, if we once again follow the official narrative, they're all supposed to be man-made in biological labs. So they're certainly not natural, if we believe the official version.
Changing the relationship between wild, domestic, and human animals makes pandemics more likely, which is why we need to restore balance with the natural world through decisive action on climate change and restoring biodiversity. If we look at the planet as if it were a patient, we can see that our activities have been damaging her immune system, and she has been struggling to function and thrive due to the strain we have put on her vital organs.
This is his last transmission.
Who is he?
Some climate change doomsayer expounds something called Gaia theory about the world healing itself or some such. But what's curious is he's not actually missing. This is Professor Arnold at Imperial College this morning.
So nature creates viruses in animals that they then pass on to us because we've all been mistreating the planet in a sort of vengeful payback, which begs one to question why it didn't wipe us all out during the Industrial Revolution and World War I and World War II. One would naturally think it would have been far more annoyed with us as we polluted the planet and destroyed a good section of the world with all those bombs, mortars, shells and nuclear weapons. Yet it didn't. So now, after becoming more green in recent decades, it decides it's going to plague us all with disease and pandemics. Although, if animals are responsible for viruses, is he proposing ridding the planet of all likely animal carriers?
To treat her, we need to restore balance and put nature back at the center of the circle. And to achieve this, we must act for health and well-being.
Act for health and well-being. Whose health and whose well-being? Ours or the planet? Or maybe both? But what the hell does that actually mean?
Understand nature's patterns and cycles, recognize the value of diversity, unity, and the interdependence of all living things.
And there it is, diversity, better known as LGBTQ, with unity and interdependency. And while it has always been understood that nature is diverse, upon which we rely very heavily, how exactly does unity work when this reality is wholly manufactured and false, while any interdependency under this construct relies on us taking as much as we can from nature, so that large corporations, of which the royal estate is but one, can make millions upon millions in profit?
Consider the importance of innovation and adaptation, and invest in nature-based solutions to help stimulate a more circular bioeconomy that gives back to nature as much as we take from her. Now, I can only hope that as this current crisis passes, we are able to reflect on and shape the type of world we want for ourselves and for future generations.
The current crisis will only pass when they're certain that their Great Reset can take effect. Otherwise, they'll hit us with even more psychological terror until the majority consensus complies.
The 75 years after the Second World War saw unprecedented growth, rising longevity, and poverty reductions. But all this put an overwhelming strain on our environment.
Notice the tune from Klaus's song sheet referencing World War II.
The good news is that we have many of the solutions to hand.
Well, what a surprise. It's almost like they knew in advance. But we know it better as the Hegelian dialectic, or problem-reaction-solution. The problem was COVID and climate change, so they have to wait for the appropriate reaction. But, as we just heard, they already have the solution ready and waiting.
Renewable energy is now cheaper than fossil fuels.
Renewable energy doesn't work and is both more wasteful and deadlier to the environment than existing fossil fuels. See Michael Moore's Planet of the Humans documentary.
Our agriculture and land use can be more resilient, healthy and productive if we do not degrade our land, destroy our forests.
They are already being destroyed in the name of renewable energy, not by us, but by mega corporations that stand to make billions from their destruction.
And poison our water.
The water is already contaminated with fluoride and all the other chemicals added, including and not limited to all the pharmaceutical drugs that cannot be filtered from the wastewater due to the archaic filtration systems employed by water treatment facilities.
Unfortunately, we so often forget that we are profoundly dependent on nature for our lives and livelihood. So, how do we balance the need to rebuild economic prosperity, the need to get people back to work against environmental concerns? Investing sustainably now can be a fast, efficient, and attractive way to reboot our economy. Therefore, what should be the principles that underlie the reshaping of a new and better global economic system? To seize this window of opportunity, I believe we need to do 5 things.
Once again, he stresses seize the window of opportunity, where seize means to take forcibly.
First of all, to create momentum for the Great Reset, we need to capture the imagination and will of humanity.
Notice the word capture, to take by force or stratagem, take prisoner or seize, which is done through media programming and indoctrination, but ultimately by force.
We will only change if we really want to change.
Because only through consent and belief can the author bring any imagined concept into the physical world. They must first create the concept in our minds and then make us believe in its possible existence, and thereby consent to our use of physical skills to manufacture and manifest it into physical reality. So we will only change if we want that change, although it may ultimately not be the change they were expecting.
Secondly, the global economic recovery must set us on a new trajectory of sustainable employment, of livelihoods and economic growth. To achieve scale, we must not be afraid to reorientate our long-standing incentive structures, which have been having such perverse effects on our planetary environment and on nature herself, if we are to reap the benefits afforded by a more sustainable world. Thirdly, we must redesign systems and pathways to advance net zero transitions globally.
Net zero transmission means zero carbon emissions, while every living creature, including but not limited to humans, produce carbon, upon which all plant life flourishes. So zero carbon means zero creatures, and zero plant life, because without CO2, it dies.
And in this regard, carbon pricing can form a critical pathway to genuinely sustainable markets.
Carbon pricing, putting a price on CO2, which means turning it into a commodity upon which they place a tax to create a tier system of allowances. Some producing a lot of CO2, while others use next to none. So deals can be struck to trade allowances, but if you're small and produce too much, then you'll effectively get shut down in favour of the larger opposition, who can either afford to pay more tax or can find another company willing to sell some of their unused allowance.
This reset moment is our opportunity to accelerate and align our efforts to create truly global momentum.
Reset moment, that's twice. While momentum, from the original Latin momentum, means influence. Now where have we seen that before?
Countries, industries, and businesses moving together can create efficiencies and economies of scale that will allow us to leapfrog our collective progress and accelerate our transition.
Countries, industries, and businesses, but not one mention of individual people. A collective of financial gain only.
Fourthly, we must reinvigorate science, technology, and innovation. This crisis has shown the importance of investing in science, technology, and innovation. We are on the verge of catalytic breakthroughs that will alter our view of what is possible and profitable within the framework of a sustainable future.
Possible and profitable, and that's the most important angle, regardless of what's really good for the planet.
And fifthly, we must rebalance investment. Accelerating sustainable investment could offer significant economic growth and employment opportunities, including in green energy, the regeneration of nature and landscapes, the circular bioeconomy, ecotourism, and green public infrastructure. It is time, therefore, to align sustainable solutions with funding in a way that can transform the marketplace. This would be the most dramatic act of responsible leadership ever seen by the global private sector, and would at once provide a catalytic incentive for the public sector to follow.
So now industry and businesses are our leaders, who were never elected or chosen by the people, yet who will now take us into the Great Reset, where each country will willingly and submissively now agree and consent to everything on our behalf. A true democracy.
We have a golden opportunity to seize something good from this crisis.
Golden opportunity, which means influence, followed by the word seeds, which again is force, while gold was the code name for the central beach during the D-Day landings during World War II. And as they keep referencing the Second World War, the association certainly isn't lost, because this is their D-Day.
Its unprecedented shockwaves may well make people more receptive to big visions of change.
More military terminology, with shockwave initiating response to change, referring to the psychological shock that they intended to pulse through the populace to make them more susceptible to the concepts of change.
Global crises like pandemics and climate change know no borders and highlight just how interdependent we are as one people sharing one planet. Over the past month or so, despite the ongoing crisis, I've been encouraged to see the growing calls for a green recovery. We need only look to the United Nations Secretary General, to the IMF, the EU, the Petersburg Climate Dialogue, the Canadian government, the COP26 Universities Network, and business leaders around the world to see this.
All heavily involved in the grand global conspiracy.
And as we move from rescue to recovery...
What recovery? A large portion of the world has gone back into lockdown, with a second wave, swine flu, and bubonic plague just around the corner. According to the official narrative, it's getting worse, not better.
Therefore, we have a unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves on a more sustainable path.
Unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity. And in case we missed it, there's that mention of reset yet again. While the time factor seems to be very important.
It is an opportunity we have never had before and may never have again. So we must use all the levers we have at our disposal, knowing that each and every one of us has a vital role to play.
Opportunity we never had before and may never have again. Ah, the inevitability of time, while levers or leverage implies yet more force.
Everything I have tried to do and urge over the past 50 years has been done with our children and grandchildren in mind. So I can only encourage us all to think big and act now.
Think big and act now. Emphasis on the now. Yet more time.
Fine. Seriously, it's fine. Well, it's not really fine, but it's not why I'm here. Yo, man, you know me. Money's not my issue. I could have retired straight out of MIT, fucked off to some island, let the business run itself. Nobody told me to try and save the planet. I wanted to. Climate change research, lobbying, years of study, billions of dollars, and you know why I quit? Because the last time I checked, the planet was still fucked. Hence, my epiphany. Money won't solve this. Those idiots who call themselves politicians have buried their heads in the sand and stood for nothing but re-election. So I spent the last 2 years trying to find a real solution. And I found it. Now, if you really want to make the world a better place, I suggest you open your fucking ears, because I'm about to tell it to you.
Go on, Mr. Valentine. I'm still listening.
As long as you agree to all my terms.
Because here in the Twilight Zone, reality is certainly becoming stranger than fiction, as the boundaries of this existence begin to break down, and where the possible and the impossible, the strange and the ludicrous, appear to merge into one. And while the sleeper willingly accepts everything in their dream as the new norm, those awakening are either beginning to take notice of the stark contrast, or are instantly and abruptly aware that the dream has now become a nightmare.